Mark, do you realize what we're walking on is so complex and most people don't know the complexity of soils?
Yeah, it actually reminds me of my professor at Purdue in agronomy. And every day he'd start the class out saying, "Young people, dirt's what's underneath your fingernails. Soil is what feeds the world." So, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
It is. Hi, my name is Lori Mann.
And I'm Mark Mann.
We're from American Biochar Company, and we really thank you for joining us today in this talk. The talk's called Create Tree Resiliency by Improving Soil Biology with Biochar. You're here to hear about biochar. And Mark, what got us started with biochar?
Well, ironically, it was from the test plot it ran between 1989 and 1999, where we realized that there was a reduction of drought stress with a different product, paclobutazole. This is a picture of Dr. Cheney and I looking at the results of this test plot. We did an airspace excavation, and ironically, this is what started the American Biochar Company, because what we saw after we did our airspace excavation was on all the trees that were untreated, we had virtually no root system, which is why those trees were drought stressed. On the side that was treated, which you can see on the left-hand side, we had a mass of fine root hairs which enabled that tree to absorb enough water to keep it out of drought, which was interesting. But it was right at this time when I talked to Dr. Cheney and I said, "Bill," I said, "if we had some kind of a fixed carbon, we could literally solve this problem indefinitely." And he said, "Where are you going to get that?" And I says, "I don't know, but I'm going to try to find it." It wasn't until 2015 when I actually found the first good form of carbon, which then became the American Biochar Carbon. One of the things that I noticed, and I took this picture as I was walking through the woods behind our place, and I noticed that on the forest floor, which most of you know, there's a normal process that happens when carbon's constantly going back into the soil. And this just has to be one of those pictures. And I realized that we have stopped that cycle on everything that we've seen with the trees in our urban environment and or in your own lawns. That we no longer have leaves falling down and going back into the soil, sticks breaking down. So interestingly enough, there's been so much research on this, and this happens to be one of those research projects by Rital Lon. And this is where we know that we've lost between 50 and 70% of our carbon source in the soil. This is why we're having these kind of problems, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
The type of problems that we're having with trees, urban trees specifically, and we feel that this is something that you would specifically be interested in. So there is an overall trend that has been observed for a long period of time. The average lifespan of most urban trees is about 7 years, at the most 10 years. The problem is trees don't really give back until they're a lot older than that, and we have this great turnover in urban trees. In fact, we have a problem just even having trees survive after transplanting. Newly transplanted trees are not usually reaching establishment age, and when they are being pulled out, it's the root system, it's the soil, it's the problem that Mark was talking about in regards to carbon and the cycle. We have water cycle, we have the nitrogen cycle, we have a carbon cycle. We have, as he said it perfectly, we have interfered with that, and urban trees are suffering very badly in that situation. Just a note, trees accumulate more than 40% of their lifetime's worth of carbon and their later part of their life, in the last quarter of their life. So that capturing of the carbon isn't really reaching a maximum until later on. So what we see is urban soils are deficient. They're deficient in overall structure. They're deficient in soil organic matter. That's that carbon processing. And in our opinion, most importantly, our urban soils are devoid of soil microbes. And what we're going to talk about today is the fact that it's the biochar that's going to help bring that back into the soil. But it's going to be soil microbes that end up creating that living environment. So we want to support that. We want to find ways to support that soil microbes because it is that connection that is going to actually save our soils. Urban soils are unable to support a sustainable, long-term urban forest, and that's what we want to work on, is helping with that. The best way to do that, in our opinion, over years. Now, he said he's found that about 2015, but this is something that's been building up prior to 1990 with Mark. And and I'm real impressed with him about that. But what we have found with biochar specifically is that biochar can create what we like to call a soil reef. That soil reef will add structure to the soil. That structure is because biochar doesn't break down for over 800 years. It's going to stay there. It's going to be there when we're gone. And that the porosity, if it's a good biochar, that porosity creates living space. It holds water, it holds air, it holds food, and it protects those soil microbes. Also on the side, we'll show you some other things that it also does as well. But by adding biochar, we can then support the biology of the soil because it is the microbes supported by the biochar that will save our soils and our trees and other plants and crops.
The solution is right under our feet, and it's as old as dirt.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
Modern agriculture was not designed for the betterment of the soil.
Fossil fuels are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change. When we damage soils, carbon goes back to the atmosphere.
But when we destroy soil, it releases carbon dioxide.
Abiotic factors that affect trees on a daily basis. Abiotic meaning that it is non-biological. Well, first of all, those poor trees. In an urban setting, we have poor beginnings. The subsoil layer, overburdened construction or sterile soils are put in after they strip all the good stuff, and they put these trees in this. And there's just nothing there for those trees. So they immediately are starting with a very poor beginning. What we also see is excessive soil compaction. It might be prior to the trees being planted there, but the bottom line is these trees are very compacted. Compaction reduces oxygen availability. It reduces the ability of water to percolate through and get to the root systems. That in itself can create drought conditions. But also, those trees are surrounded by concrete, sidewalks, metal, glass, pavement. Surrounding them is an area that does not support the availability of water. So they're in a drought condition. And exposure to salt, petroleum, and other pollutants from traffic or whatever. We have this as a problem. Even an excess of lime coming from the concrete of the buildings can be exposed to those trees. We also have nutrient deficiency. There's usually little or no organic matter cycling. Think about that. We keep trying to, Mark mentioned that earlier too, we mow our lawns, and what do? A lot of us pick up that clippings and we remove it. Trees drop leaves, we remove it. We don't see a lot of organic matter cycling in urban settings. So they don't even have the opportunity to have organic matter food. Man-made stressors such as grates and stuff like that, people knocking it, dogs peeing on the trees, whatever. Those kinds of things also make it a real hard situation for trees. To make matters worse, according to Altieri and Nichols, continued use of synthetic fertilizers cause nutrient and soil microbe imbalances and has lowered the pest resistance. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Yes, plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But when we give synthetic fertilizers to plants, which normally is processed through by the microbes, we are bypassing the microbes. Their job, which is why I have here job fair for the microbes, their job becomes irrelevant because the plant gets those. Now, is that everything the plants need? No. It's not. But the things that the plants need are not being processed and provided by the microbes. So we're interfering with the whole process. And that's what we're going to zero in on a little bit more. Now, what happens though if we were to encourage Mother Nature, encourage that biology? Well, one of the things that we would see is that we have the nutrient cycling, the decomposition, with the biology doing that. We would also see that nutrients become bioavailable through and by the microbes. The microbes break down the different kinds of components, the nutrients, in a form that plants can take in. We call that bioavailability. And they transport too. Fungus, the mycorrhizae of fungi, they bring that food to the roots itself. We also see in the soil itself the cation exchange capacity improving. In other words, metals, the positive metals like magnesium and calcium, etc., those metals are released and made available to the plants through microbiotic action. We also are going to see with that, if you have a healthy soil microbiology in the soil, we see disease resistance. This is exciting. If you have a high population, if the density of the microbiology in the soil around the roots is high enough, it can actually act as a deterrent from any kind of pathogenic type bacteria or fungi. And that's a bonus, because then we have plants that are healthier and are able to resist those kinds of stresses. And some examples of that is Bacillus, Clonostaches, and Trichoderma. Those bacteria and fungi have been directly shown as to be ways and specific microbes that help resist disease and other type of stresses. So we've been talking about improving biology in your soil. And Mark and I are in a firm belief that you don't have to go outside of where you live or where you're doing the work to get the biology. The soil has biology, maybe not right where you're working. And I know that there's some areas in like some urban cities, suburban areas, where there's no way there's any kind of biology. And the soil that's left behind is so poor, it's not supporting that. But that's the key, okay? No matter how it's put in there, whatever the biology is, you've got to make sure that soil is ready to accommodate it. And I talk about the biochar helping the soil by creating like a soil reef for the biology. You can get biology so many different ways. Now, we can get biology from sources. I've got here Rutella. It's a wettable powder, and you can mix that in with water. You can also get, I know there's Rhizocell, and there's a granular that you can throw in there, and it works in there. We also got real excited about Locust Ag, their Pterodyne, because it was literally brewed just like a beer crafting kind of a thing, where they brew the biology, so the biology is actually live, and they keep it cold so that when it warms up, then it starts going. And so there's lots of different places you can go to get biology, and I've only listed a few. There's a lot of good stuff out there. You just got to make sure that the viability is good enough that it's not, you're not wasting money. You're not wasting your client's money, you're not wasting your time, etc. There are so many other ways to get the biology that you don't have to go outside. You can get it by composting. You can go into just the edges of woods, and you just need a little. It's like a sprinkling of yeast going into the flour, and that just, you know, if it's ready and your soil is ready to receive that, and you've helped it get ready, then it's going to go. You don't need a lot. Even this soil, it's not been disturbed. Top 6 inches or so, you've got biology here. And you just need to get a little bit started, that's all. I would go in to my garden, or, you know, any other place that's undisturbed. It's going to have the biology you need, and it's going to be the local biology. So it's going to do better than something from far off. So I'm just thinking of, you know, what's going to do well, what's going to be a best cost for you, and the ease. Sometimes the ease is ordering from somebody. Resilience defined: the ability to recover from or adjust to changes within the environment. In this talk, we're talking about plants that are able to respond to changes, specifically stresses, in their environment. Now, what we see is that is directly related to the health of the soil. As we've been showing and talking about this whole time, the health of the soil relates to the health of the trees and other plants. The connection between a plant's resiliency, its ability to bounce back from stresses, and its ultimate survivability to negative environmental changes relies heavily on the quality of its soils. And by the way, climate change. Now, whether or not you are in agreement as to whether there is or isn't climate change, the fact of the matter is temperatures in suburban and urban areas are increasing. And it's because we have interrupted the hydrological water cycle above these areas that are made of concrete, glass, and steel. These areas, the temperature has been increasing, and that has a negative effect on plants. How can the plants respond positively? By having a better soil that will increase their resiliency.
Trees may look like solitary individuals, but the ground beneath our feet tells a different story. Trees are secretly talking, trading, and waging war on one another. They do this using a network of fungi that grow around and inside their roots. The fungi provide the trees with nutrients, and in return they receive sugars. But scientists have found this connection runs far deeper than first thought. By plugging into the fungal network, trees can share resources with each other. The system has been nicknamed the Wood Wide Web. The hidden network creates a thriving community between individuals. When you're next in woodland, you might like to think of trees as part of a big superorganism, chatting and swapping information and food under your feet.
We've included this excerpt because of how it represents that soil is a living, moving organism of itself. What we stand on is active. And what we have here in this visual is it's a hyphae. And the inside, that's just the cytoplasm moving in the hyphae. And that's a fungus, okay? But what you see in outline, that's the glomalin. And it acts as a coating. And what it does is it creates like a greasy highway that organisms, and you can see the little organisms on the along the outside moving so fast. This is real time, folks. That's bacteria and or protozoan that are moving along here from different locations. And the point is it is a living organism, and I just find that super fascinating. What we have in the soil, we're plants. It doesn't have to be a tree. We can have crops, we can have shrubs, we can have grass, we can have trees. All of these have a living soil zone. We call that a rhizosphere. It's around the roots, and it's chock full of bacteria, archaea, fungi, protozoan, algae, nematodes, arthropods, ants, earthworms. It's got all these living organisms in there. That's what's missing. That's what we are responsible for helping build back up, using the biochar as mentioned earlier. Bacteria can create a biofilm that can hold water in the soil if you have a healthy population. Fungi can bring water and nutrients to the plants. You know, folks, remember how we, was it Shigo who talked about at least taking applications of stuff to the drip line because it was obvious that the roots of trees went all the way up to and then past. Trees can get nutrients and food and water and everything else beyond itself, beyond its own roots, by the extensions of the mycorrhizae and the fungi in the soils. So it is helping to connect and draw to them water and nutrients for the plant roots. Nematodes decompose dead organic matter, and as they begin to do that, then the bacteria take care of it, and then all of a sudden it's available in a form that can be brought into the plant. Earthworms, love them, aerate the soil, improve water infiltration, and arthropods, they are the mechanical shredders of the soil. All of these play a role. And when we, again, as mentioned earlier, when we bypass by using things like synthetic fertilizer, we A, don't provide everything the plant needs, but B, we bypass these organisms, and then the rhizosphere is not as effective. And as mentioned a little earlier, if you don't have a good, high, dense population, you also expose the plant to more pathogens and disease. So, how does the rhizosphere get formed? This is fun. This is really fun. Plants, it's amazing. what Mother Nature, what God has created for us. Plants literally exude up to 50% of the carbohydrate sugars that they produce from their crown, from the sun, and they change the sun, the light to energy, and they move up to 50% of that sugar down to its roots, and not just down to the roots for storage, but to literally out of it. It literally secretes these carbohydrates and vitamins and enzymes and sugars and amino acids. Included in the exudates are the growth hormones and other hormones. Folks, why in the world would a plant give up 50% of what it worked hard to produce unless it was important? Literally, the plant can exude or secrete out that much. And the roots are set up that way. There was a very interesting study that showed that there's actually little organelles found in the root systems that actually are involved in releasing that. So that tells me that the rhizosphere should be treated with much more respect than what we've done. And I really love that because it exudes different things. So the hormones and the enzymes, they can change. They can change depending on the time of the year, depending on what the plant's actually doing, depending on its age even, okay? And what they do, as things change, you'll see microbe populations around rhizospheres change, especially like, for example, in fruit trees. As they're setting fruit or in their flower or whatever, that population changes. And the cool part is, the way that the trees and the microbes communicate, because it's both ways, is both by enzymes as well as flavonoids. And flavonoids are these molecules which signal and stimulate microbes. So the tree, as it's communicating and needs more or less, or is alerting for, some kind of pathogen coming in, or the bacteria is alerting it, they call out with the flavonoids and they signal and change the biology makeup of the rhizosphere. So there was a study by Elaine Ingram of the Soil Food Web, Inc. And she ran a study, a 7-day study, on the effects of soil biology after adding humate and biochar to a soil. Now, this soil was just a normal soil. It had biology in it already. There wasn't anything added. It wasn't sterile or anything. It was just a normal dug out soil. And biology and humate was added to it. And this is the cool part. Within 7 days, the soil had changed positively. There was almost 30% increase in bacteria. There was over 5,000% increase in flagellates. Total fungi increased by 50%. Protozoan populations increased by 1,000%. And we had nitrogen increase by at least 100%. Now, that nitrogen, which again we talk about NPK, NPK, that nitrogen increased because of the biology. That nitrogen increased because of the bacteria specifically, and also the protozoan population, because as the protozoans are being eaten by other things, they release nitrogen. So just within a week's time, the soil began to change. And we want to talk more about how we can do that. Maybe not in 7 days, but certainly we can change it quickly. Biochar is a fixed carbon. It's produced through pyrolysis, which is like combustion, but has a very low oxygen availability, very high temperature. And it's a pretty fast process. We use specifically, the feedstock we use is a consistent wood, soft wood, and specifically, to be specific, it's recycled southern yellow pine. We like softwood versus other choices is because you can clean it out and just leave behind the little vesicles, the xylem phloem, all those little holes and everything that are in wood, softwood in particular, is easily cleaned out. This is what we get from our fixed carbon of biochar. We get an increase of water holding capacity of 30% in the soil. We see also fertilizer efficiency is increased between 10 and 30%. When we have applicators use the biochar, we literally tell them use less fertilizer, at least 50% less, because you're going to get more out of your fertilizer. You're not going to have as much leach through, which is a great thing. That saves you money. It gives you an opportunity to do other things with that money. Nutrient retention, and it can increase from 30 to 90%. It also will effectively reduce soil compaction, improve soil cation exchange capacity, and also the movement of water through the soil. And lastly, but as I already mentioned, it enhances microbe communities, which also begin to, just by their presence, make water percolate better, hold water better in the soil, process nutrients so they can get to the plant. I don't know if you're noticing this, but we keep saying the same kind of a thing. I'm cycling about cycling. And that is because microbes are so important in the soil, and it's so important for us to find ways to support it. And we used a fixed carbon. You know what else we use? We use an active carbon. Our humate that we use is a fresh water source. We feel that's very important. There's also saltwater sourced humate, but ours is from North America, and we use a freshwater sourced humate. And humate actually comes from ancient plant life when a large area of the United States was literally underwater, and then we had it fall down. The plants and the animals fell, floated down in the water and created a wonderful reservoir of bioavailable, decomposed by thousands of years, material, organic matter. What does humate do? It's a cool, all by itself. Biochar's cool. Humate's cool. Humate does a lot of really cool things. One of it, it's a natural surfactant. So it makes the wettability of the soil allow water to move through it easier. It makes water wetter, is how I think of a surfactant. It can increase aeration and the water holding capacity just by its own natural mineral content. It chelates metal ions in soil. That means it makes those necessary minerals more easily available by the plant, by pulled up through its roots. It improves soil structure by making it more friable. It makes it more it allows the soil pieces to aggregate so that you end up having more space between soil particles. It has over 80 minerals and trace elements. It acts as a natural fertilizer, and it enhances seed germination. And here it is again, reestablishes soil micropopulations. We're going to take a quick break now. We'd love it if you would join us for the upcoming part 2. So we've talked about 2 types of carbon. One type, active carbon, included the humate, but it can also include other types of organic matter, such as compost, animal manure, and other types of green material. That is a temporary, used up material, the carbon, the active carbon, and so that's something that we have to continuously replace. The other type of carbon was the fixed carbon. That's our biochar. I call it fixed because our biochar can last 600 to 800 years, way beyond our own selves. And therefore, it's still in the soil, creating and maintaining structure. Now, what is a good biochar? Well, the first and foremost, in my opinion, is its porosity, the amount of pores. And what's really neat about our biochar is you could take a bucket full of biochar, say a bucket like 5-gallon bucket from Menards, fill it up with biochar, and do you know that we can actually have over 500 acres of surface area in that bucket? That is 500 acres plus of areas that bacteria, fungi, protozoans, the soil microbiology has for protection, for water storage, for air, food, etc. This is what actually will stay and help form a better soil. Not all biochars are equal, so I suggest you use our biochar checklist. What we worked with and found to be the highest quality for feedstock specifically is single-sourced recycled wood. As mentioned already, we use softwood. It is different than something like charcoal. You want to make sure that your biochar is very porous and has little to no impurities. One of the ways to do that is to have complete pyrolysis. Now that I do mean the word complete. You have partial pyrolysis, you have partial burning through combustion. That's something more like charcoal. You want to have high temperature, very low oxygen, and what you end up with is a higher carbon content in your biochar, which is what we want, and you have a lower ash content. Minimum percent of moisture should be 20%. Now that might seem kind of anti-intuitive. Our biochars can have almost up to 40% water holding moisture, and it still will feel dry. It has a little bit of a cool feel to it, but here's the cool part. It's bringing literally and holding water as it's being put into the soil. And so by doing that, you get a few little benefits. Okay, having at least a minimum of 20% moisture in your biochar means when it travels from one location to you, the little pores that make up the biochar do not collapse on themselves. It acts as a support for the little pores. Also, really dry biochar can actually be hydrophobic. The water can bead on top of it. So by having at least a minimum of 20% or more moisture content allows it to work with the water in the soil or added to the soil later and not repel it. Good adsorption. Now this is not a misspell. Good adsorption means that it's not like a sponge, but it's brought to the surface area of the biochar. Okay, and so what you want is you want to have good adsorption of your biochar, and that, by the way, is related to the process, the pyrolysis, and also the feedstock itself. You don't want to have biochar that looks very oily or shiny, because then you know you have other things in there besides just the carbon, that fixed carbon. And you want your biochar to be pretty consistent. Now, it's not perfect or anything, but you don't want to have big chunks, and you don't want to have it real small either in a granular form. Lastly, this is something that we repeatedly tell people when they're talking about biochar. They want to take biochar and they want to stick it right into the soil immediately by itself. If you have a good biochar that's very porous and you put it into the soil, it's going to pull the water and the nutrients from the soil. Now eventually, it'll even out and begin to give, but at first, if you put a biochar directly in right at the base of a plant or a tree, it actually works negatively initially. So we suggest you do this. You charge, that's the term, not inoculate, not activate. You charge the biochar before you apply it. You can charge it with humate, compost, worm castings, fertilizer. You could do that. That's not as good of a charging material as some of these other things. Even compost tea. But you do want to charge it before you put it into the soil. Now, there are ways to add biochar to the soil. One of the ways that we've also applied biochar and the humate is our liquid VitalBlend. It is liquid humate with micronized biochar, and we put that in together, and that makes a very easy way to apply Tom Myers of Myers PHC has utilized VitalBlend, which is the biochar and humate blend, for several years now, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what he sees as a useful way to use the biochar blend.
I'm Tom Myers with Myers Plant Healthcare. We specialize in PHC work, most of our time spent diagnosing and treating tree disorders. Today I'm here to talk a little bit about VitalBlend and the benefits of biochar and humic acid. So after having great success with the humic acid, I was also interested in biochar. We'd been hearing about that for quite a few years. And the VitalBlend biochar comes from southern yellow pine. What happens during the process of heating this is the wood is heated in very low oxygen and very high temperature. So at some point during this process, the wood expands or pretty much just pops. And I'd compare it to the way a kernel of corn, which is very dense, pops when it gets heated. So the fibers in the wood will expand, becomes very light, becomes very airy, and you have a huge increase in the surface area in those fibers. So the drawback to just using humic acid alone is that it's an active carbon, so that means it's eventually going to go away, just like you would see with compost. The cool thing about biochar is that biochar is going to be a fixed carbon, so that stays in the soil for hundreds of years. I've seen estimates of life in the soil lasting more than 1,000 years even. So when you combine the humic acid with biochar, you're getting more life out of your humic acid while also getting better aeration and surface area for the microbes with the biochar, and it kind of acts like its own soil reef for microbiology. Another thing that I really like about the VitalBlend is that the biochar helps to bind up soil contaminants, things like de-icing salts, herbicides, other things that are floating around out there. We've been able to improve a number of different plantings, particularly one where we saw the best results were with white pines. Pines were near a parking lot. The parking lot gets salted too heavily every year. They get really heavy doses of salt and turned yellow because of it. And the first season we started to use that, we were using a higher rate than we normally would because we were dealing with contaminants. And we saw a nice change in the trees. Some of that chlorosis, the yellowing went away. They're much greener than they were. And again, the turf, the large area of turf underneath these trees was much better than the surrounding turf where we didn't do the application with the VitalBlend. So the overuse of herbicides, it's always been a big concern of mine. So whenever we're using this on urban trees, I walk away feeling good that even if we weren't using it specifically for that problem, that the biochar is still going to help reduce any injury, some of the injury that might come from the herbicides that are used in the lawns. When we're using the air knife to decompact soils, the VitalBlend is my absolute favorite amendment because it reduces the chance of that soil getting recompacted after we've decompacted it with the soil, because sometimes those will tend to just go back into a state of compaction again, and the VitalBlend helps reduce that risk. It also helps with extending our season because it can be done anytime during the growing season. We apply later into the fall than we normally would, and we can start up with our applications earlier in the spring. We've even done some applications in the middle of winter, knowing that it's still going to be there in the spring. So that opens us up in the springtime to be able to focus more on what we normally need to be doing in the spring, which is fungicide applications and a few insecticide applications. So when talking with clients about the VitalBlend, what they like to hear most is that the product is 100% organic. It stays in the soil for, like I said, 600 plus years. It improves the tree's health. It can improve the appearance, flowering, and survivability. And another thing that I like to throw out there is Purdue's using that on their campus. It's being used on a lot of their flower beds with great success.
I want to take you on a tour across the country. It's great that we can talk about the science of what we're doing with charged carbon, but it's even more exciting when you get to see the results. So I'm going to take you from California to Missouri to Florida, back to Michigan, and back to Indiana. And we could go on a lot further than that, but I wanted you to see this because this is a broad spectrum of different soils, different temperature types. So let's start with California. Out in Rancho Cordova, California, I was actually asked to come out there by Gerald Dobbs, and I love Gerald. He is in charge of Michigan State University, grounds department. And after he had taken a job out in Rancho Cordova, he called me literally probably within the first 6 months he was out there and said, Mark, I wonder if you can come out and take a look at our soils. He said, these are some of the worst soils I've ever seen. I said, certainly. Well, we did an application of VitalBlend on Rancho Cordova soils in 2015. And 14 months after that one application, we went back in and did a soil core analysis, and this is what we found. We'd actually increased the rooting depth on this soil, which is a 5-year-old park, from 2 inches to 10 inches in 14 months. And if you look at this, the pictures on this, you can see how friable, how the soil is decompacted, and we have root depth all the way down to 10 inches. Now this is one of the things we did on this. We actually decreased our fertilizer use mandated by California, and we decreased our water usage by 30%. And yet we still had better results from the application. Now, I could keep talking about this, but what I want to do now is I want to give you an opportunity to listen to Jim Morales talk to you himself about what he saw. Okay, we're at Sunridge Park with Jim Morales. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Mark.
And we're just doing our first core soil analysis here. And we can see... Well, Jim, why don't you go ahead and explain? I mean,
So this is our Sunridge Park. We're a 90, 10, 90 fescue and 10% bluegrass here. This park is about 7 years old, and we've been on this program now for doing the charged carbon this will be our third full year.
Yeah.
Third full year, I would say. And last year when we took soil samples, we had at least 6 to 8 inches of root mass. So as you can see in here, the roots are here. So I mean, the roots are down here. This is solid. We just irrigated last night too. So, but look, the roots are there, and that's at least 6+ inches.
You know what's nice, Jim, is we did this in 2017, and we had some cases of rooting depth of 10 inches.
Yeah.
But I'm just really happy that we have consistent rooting depth like that.
So you can see, the carbon is working its way down into the soil profile. It's pretty even, but I mean, the roots are there.
Yeah. Awesome.
At that depth. Awesome. This park, 4+ years ago, I mean, we were lucky if we had, 1 to 2 inches, maybe 2 inches of roots.
We actually had, at one point, depending on the core samples that were taken, it was a 1/2 inch to maximum 2 inches.
Yeah, at the most, depending on the areas of the park. You can see we have the organic layer. It's not too bad. It's in the range. I mean, we aerate this park. It literally was just aerated a week ago Monday. We aerate twice a year in the spring and the fall on all the turf here. But I mean, you can see it's pretty good. I'd love to see the fact that you can't pull it apart because we have rooting in there. But I'd love to see the carbon all the way down here. That's awesome. Yeah, the carbon's all the way through it. You can see, it's in here. But I mean, it's solid. Well, awesome. So this is a great plug. Okay, now you heard Jim talk about his own opinion of what he's seen out in Rancho, and he's still using our product today. In fact, they're using it on every park in the Rancho Cordova system, and he's invited, I think, 59 different other park systems just to come and see what has happened here. Now, in this slide, you'll see Heron Landing and Hillside Park. On Heron Landing, this is in May of 2018, and this is, again, California always has drought. This was another drought situation, but you can see in Heron Landing where no charged carbon was used, 0, as compared to Hillside Park, which had 1 application in the previous year. And you can see the difference here, and this was just with adding, everything else was the same. This is just with adding the charged carbon, in this case VitalBlend, which is, to me, fantastic. Now we're going to go to Missouri.
Now we're down in Missouri, and these are Chinese chestnut trees. And looks like I need to lose a little bit of weight there. But the trees I'm standing next to are 2-year-old Chinese chestnut trees. These are grafted, so this is the 3rd year they've been alive, the 2nd year they're in the ground. Now behind me, off to my right-hand side, you can see the control trees where we didn't add the charged carbon. And you can see that they're just about up to possibly mid-thigh on me. And but this is the difference. And this has we had no fertilizer. This is all biology. And this is the exciting thing. This is real-time stuff. And now we're back looking at the fruit production, and we're literally producing chestnuts in the 2nd year, which is unheard of. This should not happen. But we keep saying this over and over again. This shouldn't happen. This shouldn't happen. But I think it's because we don't understand what can be genetically possible, because we've been doing things the same way for so long. And we've actually stopped saying, I can't believe it. We just say, wow, that's cool. Let's go on to the next thing. Now, we're talking about something in the same trees. This is a picture from October 31st, 2017. These trees are still flowering right now. And the only thing left to pollinate were the ants and the black wasps. But the fact that these trees were still flowering and producing fruit, which by the way never came to fruition because it was towards the end of the season, but this is another example of what happens when you increase the genetic potential of the plant. Now we're going to go to Florida. Now we're down to one of the Tropicana farms. And anybody who's familiar with the greening disease, which has been a huge problem in the citrus industry, will really understand what's going on here. But this was just top dress. We did not inject this into the soil. We just placed it around the base of the trees. And we decreased the time to harvest on these citrus trees by 25%. But more importantly, is we eliminated the effects of the greening disease. Now, the fact that we could do that had nothing to do with the fact that we were putting some kind of fungicide on there, because that's not it. As Lori said earlier, we gave that plant the ability to withstand the impact of different diseases or vectors. In this case, it was a greening disease. And that is rather fantastic. And by the way, they absolutely love us down there. I think if I went down there right now, they'd buy me 2 dinners. All right, now we're going back out to Michigan. And this is a slide where we're talking about some work we did with apples and blueberries in Michigan, and comparing 2 different kinds of applications. But what I want you to pay attention to here is the percent change in water holding capacity. So whether we're using the granular or the liquid form of the charged carbon VitalBlend, you'll notice that we had a 41% increase in water holding capacity with blueberries, and on the apples we had a 17.4% increase. Well, that's the change. And that in itself goes back to what Lori was talking about as far as the glomalin holding the water, but also the biochar, as it can adhere to the surface of the biochar. Now we're going to go to the respiration. This is what really trips my trigger, because now we're testing for increase in soil microbiology. And this, again, this is one of those moments when we said, I can't believe that we got this, but again, we're trying not to say that anymore. But if you look at this, we had almost a 77% increase in microbiology populations on blueberries with the 5M. With the granular, we're at 41.2% increase. This is in one season. This is not over a period of 3 years. This is one season. Apple trees, we had a 94.4% increase in microbes. Now this should just shock you. It is an amazing thing. Now we're going to go to the field up in Michigan. This is Lance Fritz, and Lance gave me his permission to take a picture of him. I think he had his finest on right now. But this is where we put the VitalBlend 5M through the drip line irrigation system. And we were only at 1.5 gallons per acre. That's it. 1.5. That's the power. You have to start thinking about in small ways. It's not big things you're looking at. We're using a very small amount of product to deal with some microscopic critters, which is our microbes. So it doesn't take a lot to do a lot. Now this is what we found with the blueberries.
And this was amazing. I want you to pay attention to this because it's not just about increasing crop production or making a plant look better. Yeah, we want to do that. But what we're really focusing on is, are we making things healthier? And I want you to pay attention to the protein levels here. We increased the amount of protein in the blueberries by 125%. The amount of antioxidants by 11%. Now, blueberries is a superfruit, right? So we made the superfruit more super. Now, what's funny about that is it's right back to the same thing. Do we really understand what the genetic potential of plants really is? I don't think we do. I think we're just starting to get to that point. Our total sugar increased by 3%, moisture increased by 1.5%, but listen, the total dietary fiber increased by 33%. Now, I want you to think about this. You have more protein, you have more antioxidants, you have more dietary fiber. We had the potential to really change what we're doing in the agricultural industry, so it gets me excited. Okay, now if we can make blueberries that good, what can we do with my favorite, which is beer? So if we have hops, we're doing the same thing with hops. In fact, every plant that we've touched, you'll see here in a minute that we're actually increasing many, many things. But this was actually up in Michigan. This was up with Bell's Brewery up in Comstock, Michigan. And we treated one section of their hops field up there. And what we found was we increased our strobel size by 30%, and we increased the harvest weight by 60%. Now, that's just, again, with one treatment of VitalBlend. This is the same thing you're seeing with the blueberries. Now, if you guys don't like beer, perhaps you like something else. Now, we also have been working primarily with medical marijuana, and that's bled into, obviously, since our laws have changed, into all types of cannabis. In this case, we had an increased harvest weight of a minimum of 15%, and we increased the potency of several strains of cannabis by as much as 27.8% of THC. The cannabinoids we increased by 28%, total terpenes by 29.6%. And interestingly enough, the reason we got involved in this is because I take different forms of cannabinoids because I have so many injuries from my young life anyways. And I know how much that helps me, so we thought, let's see if we can't increase this and make this even better.
So we're talking about the benefits of biochar with cannabis, and you talked about what you like to use, the CBD oil from the cannabinoids.
Right.
And I just think that, THC, cannabinoids, and terpenes, they're all almost 30%. That's huge. That's huge. Mark, there's other things that biochar, our charged biochar, has done, and that is help with contaminants. There was 2 different studies I'd love to share. May I?
Have at it.
All righty. Well, the first one, study 1, is activated biochar. Activated, by the way, as we have to tell people often, and it's not uncommon, charged is different than activated. This is biochar that has been burst open and activated. There was a result from a study on non-woody plants. It was an observation of how salt as a contaminant in the soil was removed. The study had a control, and it had a soil with salt added to it, and it had the third component was salt and biochar. The salt-added soil had 100% mortality on the non-woody plants. The control, which had no salt, was exactly the same as the salt and biochar, where they saw it was compatible. Both, it grew the same. So it was able to pull the salt from the soil, and the plants did well. There was another study that was using freshwater-derived humate. Now this one was using the salt as well. There's some good examples in Illinois where we have a lot of salt buildup, and that's during winter time. Mm-hmm. And we have that in Michigan and Indiana as well, and I'm sure in a lot of other places. Also, some places in the coast where they get a lot of ocean water coming up. So anyway, in this study number 2, we had freshwater-derived humate that was added to high saline soils. And what they saw, this is amazing, they saw a 40% reduction in the sodium chloride in 8 days, and after 4 months, almost 100%, 94%. That's kind of amazing, isn't it?
It is, but if you want to see something really cool, let me show you what I did on Petro Eberhard Golf Course.
Oh, yeah, that was amazing.
All right, so on Petro Eberhard Golf Course in Mishawaka, Indiana, it's one of the oldest and most prestigious golf courses. It's absolutely gorgeous. Built in 1929. But there's a little bit of a mistake made there in 2019, I believe it was. But there was actually an incidental over-application of a non-selective contact herbicide that was also a pre-emergence. It was called diphyrothir. And it just toasted the greens. In fact, 19 out of the 21 greens were destroyed. And we actually were able to remediate this, Lori, and you were there, and capture the chemicals and then actually grow bent grass, incidental bent grass, right on top of that within 6-7 days. So not only did we capture the contaminants, but then we made it able or possible to actually grow right on top of what technically is a chemical kill zone. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you'll notice that there's some sod that was laid down. You can see that rooting depth is approximately 2 inches or so. This picture came from me from the superintendent of Petro Eberhard, and he asked me, I was on the road, I said, we can actually grow bent grass right on top of this chemical kill zone. And I said, you can see it. I proved it to you. It's the 6th day or 7th day, and we're literally growing incidental. He says, Mark, I can't do it. I can't have it ready to play by April of next year. And I says, well, what's your option? He says, I can sod. I said, but if you sod, it's going to cost you about $280,000. He says, I don't have a choice. So he laid down the sod on all the greens, so brand new sod brought in. I was on the road again. I was someplace speaking. And when I got back in that night, that next day, this is 7 days later again, he asked me, have you seen the greens? I says, no, I haven't. He says, I went out to check on the greens. He says, I tried pulling it up to see if it was rooting. He said, I had to rip it out of the ground. So he sent me this picture, and you can see that those roots had already grown down into the soil, passed into the biochar. You can see the biochar sticking on there. So, and this is just in 7 days. So now we've taken you from California to Florida to Michigan to Indiana, and now we're going to talk about what working with biochar will do. Number one, it enhances the soil's microbial life. And boy, if you didn't get that from Lori, I don't know if you're going to get it from anybody. And it is crucial. Number two, it creates more resilience in soils. Number three, it promotes healthier trees and plants, which is why we're giving this presentation today. Number four, it builds healthier urban communities, which includes people also. And you know, the interesting thing is, Lori, that I didn't realize 23 years ago or 4 years ago, when we put our first tagline on the first company, that the beauty above starts from the science below. I had no idea that we would ever be literally at this point with company number two. But that statement we made 25 years ago is exactly what we're talking about today. Yeah. The beauty above comes from the science below. Mm-hmm. You just have to understand what that science is, and that's what we've been trying to talk to you today about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.